Welcome to Rotten Drew's January 2021 Love-Hate List, now known as Rotten Drew's Music Recommendations.
This is Sam and Drew here with Erlon Rotz to review and talk about some of the most exciting albums that came out in January 2021. It's easy in the new year to get left behind or to feel like all this new music is coming out and you have no idea how to find the tracks that you're interested in. But that's where we're here to help, to give you feedback on what you may already be interested in and to introduce you to entirely new things that you have never heard of. So stay tuned and stick with us as we go through these albums and let you know what Salmon House recommends that you should be listening to as we go into February 2021.
We then talk about a few honorable mentions that you might also enjoy that came out this month. Finally, we recommend one album to each other to come back to for next month. We're going to keep these short and sweet, so let's just jump right into it. So first off, I'm going to be talking about Sam and Drew's recommendation from last month, the Avalanches. We Will Always Love You. Sam and Drew's recommendation is one that I was well aware of and had even listened to some of the singles before the album was released. Even though I didn't really give them that thorough of a listen, I felt a little disinterested or a little underwhelmed by some of those singles. So I wasn't very interested in the album. And even as Sam and Drew was reviewing it, I think I mentioned that I wasn't interested in listening to it. But he assigned it to me anyways. And I gotta say, I'm glad he did. Forcing me to listen to this and just being more focused on it made me realize there's a lot more to dig into this album than I had initially credited. Like he mentioned last month, there are some crazy different features on here. Some of the more notable ones for me were Blood Orange or Kurt Vile and Denzel Curry. And Blood Orange was one of the initial reasons why I found out about this album, just seeing he was featured on one of the singles. But there are so many other good ones, and I did enjoy most of them. And the voicemail interludes were also very interesting and mysterious. I'm still unsure if there's a strong storyline here, but even if there isn't, and they're just there for aesthetic reasons, they fit in pretty well, and I actually quite like them. Some of the strongest tracks for me are The Divine Chord, Music Makes Me High, Running Red Lights, and Reflecting Lights. Most of these are actually singles, and I ended up enjoying them much more once I heard them in the context of the album. Initially, I wasn't a big fan of the production, not to say that it was bad. I just felt like there was a whole lot going on and a lot of it was very forward. I felt like nothing really took a step back or sat in the pocket very much. But looking into it a little bit more, I noticed that I didn't feel that way so much by the end of my listening. I realized that I was judging it a little bit too hard because it didn't seem like such a bad thing after listening to it over and over again. The beats were pretty repetitive, but they were catchy enough that they didn't really tire me out. I think most of them I could still listen to, and I'm still enjoying myself while I'm listening to them. There are a few weird sound effects that I wasn't too sure of. At the very beginning of Reflecting Light, it seems like the sound is kind of just dipping in and out, almost like it's diving off of a cliff in slow motion. It's not really my favorite, but it didn't really bug me too much after listening to it a couple times. And that does seem to pop up here and there in a few different spots on the album tracks. I did really enjoy how the songs kind of seamlessly transitioned into each other. It was really, really easy to pop into one song and pop into another. One of my favorite transitions is hearing Wherever You Go into Music Makes Me High. It just feels like you're stepping out of this bar that you've just been sitting at and you're just walking into an even bigger bar with a crazy party going on. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, the album actually, it grooves. It's really nice. And that's what I ended up really appreciating about it. I love music that you can just like really dance to and really get into. And yeah, this without a doubt is a love for me. I definitely would also recommend this, and I'm glad that I did take the time to listen to this a little bit more closely rather than dismiss it off of a few singles that I had heard. So great recommendation.
I was lucky enough to be recommended this album, Chapters of Zedenka by Salami Joe, Rose, Lewis, which I have to do that way every time just to make sure that I get it right. Hopefully I did. But I was glad that you recommended this to me, Erlan Rotz, because this is an artist that I had seen the name for. Many people that I know have said the same, but I had never actually listened to. And I don't know for sure, but I suspect that I might have gotten a slightly different listening experience than some of the previous work that this person has done, because it seems like, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems like some of the previous albums, like the Zedenka 2081, seemed a little bit more heady and conceptual in nature. Whereas this one, those themes may be there, but personally, I didn't really pick up on them. If anything, more what I got out of this album was, an artist with a great voice, a lot of production that reminds me a lot of what you would expect to hear on Brainfeeder, the Flying Lotus label, sort of stuff from this realm, but also certain instruments that you wouldn't expect. A song like I Need You, which has a lot of guitar on it and is sort of, doing almost like these micro loops with guitar, is very different than anything I could say, in the Flylo catalog, but I really like it. And so you have, a lot of different songs on this album that also, to me, seem to have very plaintive, kind of direct titles. And then the lyrics also kind of reflect that. So a song like F Eager to Please, that's a song that, especially when you get to those sort of lyrics at the end, to me, they almost seem to be like a lot of messages to herself, or messages to sort of almost like simple mantras to follow. That was sort of how I found a lot of these songs, which often had really direct titles and then they would be repeated in the lyrics. I was really struck by this and I liked it a lot. I was actually a huge fan. I think, this artist has a great voice. I was really surprised by that, but then also how simple some of the songs are sometimes, especially because there's so many, but like a Thermogenic Interlude, which almost sounds like video game music to me. Again, like no complaints about that. That's, a hilarious little pinky plucky interlude, but a lot of these have that kind of quality of, they almost have like little metronomes embedded or click tracks, and there's kind of a very lo-fi DIY aspect to them. But the sort of overall sound of the album is pretty complex and three-dimensional, which I also responded to. So I was a really big fan of this album. I was really not surprised because, of course, Brainfeeder is a label that I like, but I was sucked in and really kind of gripped by what I was hearing, and was like, wow, I can't believe I haven't listened to this artist. This person, has really, really good music to listen to. That sense of sort of giving yourself messages or words to live by, I think is accompanied by some of the other song titles in this album, like I Stay in Bed Too Much These Days, or Don't Pity Yourself, just sort of these messages to oneself to kind of keep your head above water and work your way through the world, especially as a young person. I actually think there's a lot of value in those. And I was surprised by how emotionally plaintive and kind of hard-hitting some of them were. Sometimes they really took me by surprise, just sort of with the simplicity of their message, but the truthfulness of it. I think one of the last songs that really gripped me on this was Cosmic Love, which just has this very sugary, sweet, kind of dreamy, wrapped up in a sort of cocoon quality that I think a lot of this music exudes, but again, it's just very cosmic, is very in tune kind of with the world beyond our world. And overall, again, just struck by how thoughtful this album was, and that for something that can be a little heady and music that can be a little offbeat, I think the messages are like really kind of direct to helmet and bring you in a good way. That's really worth listening. So I will definitely keep an eye on this artist. They get my recommends as well to echo yours. It's a love, very easy to say. Was really impressed by this, and really this whole crop of albums, I think, just kind of blew me away and was exactly the kind of music I wanted to be listening to this month, as it's kind of so cold and dreary. I think all these are great for dealing with kind of those more existential bluesy feelings that the winter can bring on.
Another recommendation that I've got is Rap Ferreira's Bob's Son. Rap Ferreira / Milo / Scalps Hotel has got another album toss our way. And the usual witty bars and unusual tone and slow jazz beat inspired beats are definitely still present, but he does feel a little bit more disjointed or wacky on this one than he often would. The first couple of tracks are honestly great examples of this. Battle Report is just repeating, play Bob's Son, activate Bob's Son, on Bob's Son, and just very different ways. And he kind of gets a little bit more unhinged as he goes until he almost sounds like he's crying by the end of it. He does include many moments where his typical flow and really witty bars are present. But these are just small little moments, just kind of sprinkled throughout the whole album. They often get interrupted by interludes, beat changes, background vocals, all kinds of stuff just kind of pop in and change the direction of the song entirely. You're often getting several different songs or pieces of songs within one track. So it's a very interesting approach. He's jumping around every minute or so, going from a punchy beat, using a bizarre sample to transition into a dreamy piano rhythm, and then back to a more simpler beat to amplify those quick wit bars that he has. The album's really chaotic and it's all over the place, but it's structured enough that it gets to keep your attention and keeps you interested. It kind of just delivers exactly what it needs to say and then moves on to the next thing. Rarely is there ever a chorus for you to sing along to, so when they do come around, it is a nice welcome, but they definitely don't linger for too long. The bizarre nature of this whole album is really interesting, and I think that for some of the people that are really deep into the lore of Black Orpheus, may or may not like this album as much, but I think because of how weird it is, it does really attract me to it. It makes me a little bit more interested in it. I'd find that even though I really enjoyed some tracks from Milo, I wouldn't really want to sit down through a whole album just because it's so intense and there's a lot that he's trying to get out in such a short amount of time that you really have to kind of pick it apart to really appreciate the entire album. So it's not something that I usually approached in my free time. This to me seems like a slightly easier way to approach it. Not that he's trying to say anything that is any less important here or that he's using any easier metaphors, but its structure makes it a little bit easier to kind of pick apart one thing and another thing and another thing all within one song rather than a whole song, which may be 3 to 4 minutes long. The shifts between the different songs in between these tracks, they're so smooth that it's actually really difficult to discern whether you're actually listening to another track or not, or whether it just completely changed halfway through. So it is at times difficult to tell why one song is one song and another is not, but I don't really see that being that big of an issue. I don't really know that the track names are that important to what is being said. The album is only 35 minutes long, but because of the structure, it often feels like you're listening to a much longer album just because there's so many different beats and there's so many different things going on that one song, even though it's 3 minutes, kind of feels like it's a 5-minute song that's been broken down into 5 1-minute songs. It's very interesting because it feels like a longer album because there's so much more to digest. Overall, I do really like the album. I would recommend it to anybody that really likes that heady rap. It says a lot in the short amount of time that it has, but it's very interesting, and I think that this strange direction that he's going in that's a little bit more unhinged, it definitely has me excited for anything that Scalps Hotel, Milo, Rap Ferreira is going to release soon. So highly recommend it. I do like this one.
All right, so first up we have Hotels, the album by Jasmine Sullivan. Now, this was an artist that I was not super familiar with myself, but from what I understand has been making music for quite a while. And this was their first album in something like 6 years. And I can definitely say that while this is in some ways a bit of a sparse album, there are a lot of different genres and styles encapsulated in it. The way the album works, as its title implies, Hotels, is that you basically get a sense of these different women's experiences and different relationships. It has a lot to say about sexuality and sort of female empowerment, and basically uses a mix of rap, R&B, and soul, and sort of where all those connect in a modern sense to really unpack a lot of truths about the sort of adult female experience. And there's really a lot of powerful moments on this album. Even though it's sort of sequenced, it takes a lot from albums like SZA's Control, and I think Solange's album, both of these sort of albums having a lot of different moments of using voicemails and voiceovers and just basically kind of allowing people to sort of express their experiences in these small interludes. And the way that Jasmine Sullivan's album works is very much that way. And even more so than I realized when I first listened to it, I definitely noticed that these were happening. I noticed these little snippets where, a woman might talk about why she was in a certain kind of relationship with a man. But what really struck me the more that I listened to it was that it's very much sequenced, where you have generally a song or maybe two songs, an interlude, a song, an interlude, a song, an interlude. And I thought that was pretty cool when I listened to it. It has almost sort of like an audio diary aspect to it that is pretty interesting. And for me, the sort of most exciting aspects of the album were really those songs that managed to artfully blend the three genres that I was talking about previously, particularly rap. A song like the intro, Bodies, really has these sort of very still kind of trap drums over it that, while the lyrics and vocals themselves are very soulful, they sort of put it in a very modern context by having these, this strong percussion, this percussion that really sort of grabs you and takes a hold of you and makes you feel like you're hearing this mishmash of different styles. And it makes a lot of sense then that you see features from artists like her and Anderson .Paak, because again, they kind of fit into that style that is very soul and R&B focused, where the vocal makes a really big difference, but at the same time can still sort of change up their flow and emulate rap even when they need to. I think this album ends really strongly as well. A song like The Other Side, which has these very soulful vocals that doesn't maybe lean as much into the hip hop side, is really nicely contrasted with the last song, Girls Like Me, where it does dip in again to that sort of more pop accessible side featuring her. So I think that this album, while it is somewhat sparse, again, it's only about 30 minutes, it does manage to cover a really wide variety of styles and shows that it's very in tune with what's popular right now. And overall, I just think the messaging, the way that it's constructed through these styles, and then also having these interludes where these women are able to sort of testify about their experience and just sort of give their perspective on their lived reality, is really exciting. And it's a great album, which I think will reward repeat listens and just finds itself in a really nice niche of cultural conversation right now that I think a lot of people would really respond to. So for that reason, this is an easy Salmon House recommends. I think, anybody that listens to this will find a song or two or three that they really respond to. And it's very contemporary, very of the moment, and I responded to it.
Next, I've got Dante Elefante's Mid-Century Modern Romance. And this is an artist that I really had no knowledge of until this month. I think January was a bit of a dry month for releases compared to the last few months. So I really tried to scour the internet for any smaller artists that were releasing something this month. And while Dante Elefante is definitely a smaller artist, he still has a fair-sized following. This album is exactly as it suggests, mid-century modern romance, and it's that from front to back. There's a ton of bopping romance tracks that you'd expect to hear from an artist in the 80s, or artists that are like bringing that aesthetic to life now, such as Jessie Ware. The lyrics are really sweet and they're to the era, fit with a rose in between its teeth. The instrumentation is perfectly selected. There's striking violins at times, there's jamming synths and some jovial drums. And the vocals also, they fit in pretty well. Even though wouldn't say that he's the best vocalist, his style and the ad libs and the chords that he's using really do fit this 80s aesthetic that he's created. All this to say, though, there is one consistent flaw throughout most of the album that's present almost on every single track, and that's that the production feels kind of flat. It feels kind of dead. Songs like Emotion are exceptions to this, but many other songs, such as Jenny, feel almost as if there are parts where no production work is really put into it. I don't feel much of a dynamic between the instruments and the vocals and the drums, and it's a shame because there's so many missed opportunities for each one of these things to shine, and it's all just kind of real flat. Comparing the two songs, Emotion and Jenny, is like night and day. Emotion's got a lot of spots where it takes advantage of it and really gives it that polish and with nice, clean, and lively production. I'd feel more comfortable recommending it if it had not been the case for most of these songs. There's only maybe 2 or 3 songs where the production is on point, and the rest of them just feel the exact same way that Jenny does. The genre does kind of help with this feeling, as most 80s albums that you might listen to didn't really have that production quality that's capable by today's standards. But even some of the major 80s artists have got their remasters. Overall, though, I still enjoy this album a lot. I think that the sweet romantic attitude is silky and dreamy. So if you're really into what I described earlier, give it a listen. There's a lot to love here. If you can just kind of get past that production, you're really gonna have a nice time, because some of these songs are really grooving. They're fun to dance to, and they're really romantic in a really fun and uplifting way. So overall, I really like it. Plus, that album cover is amazing. I love everything about that.
Next up, we have the Sound Ancestors album by Madlib, and this is a particularly exciting one. If you know me, you know that I'm very interested in Madlib and his work, and sort of finding all the little hidden nooks and crannies that he's managed to make with his sampling hip-hop style that he's really perfected over the last 20 or 30 years. Probably one of the most exciting things to say about this album is also that it's a solo album, right? This is a guy who's known for making albums for other people, like Freddie Gibbs, Talib Kweli, those sorts of hip-hop artists. He's known as somebody, Mad Villain, obviously, and of course, R.I.P. to Doom. I think that, that and sort of the shadow of this album also gives it a little bit more immediacy. But of course, there are other sort of ghosts and shadows that hang over it, Dilla being one of them. And that title, Sound Ancestors, right, which Madlib himself has explained as sort of that he's not always the one making the music, but rather it's sort of like letting your ancestors work through you, is a really exciting concept for this album. It's also mixed by Kieran Hebden, who's known as Fortet, which gives it an interesting sort of collaboration between two artists who I frankly love, and also who, both sort of make this interesting sample-based music, but, Madlib is more on the hip-hop side, Fortet is more on the electronic side. And so I think there are some really interesting moments on this album where Kieran Hebden's sort of editing and arranging, you can hear certain little tonalities and sort of areas, especially in regards to percussion, where you can sort of feel his work arranging what Madlib has done. But probably the biggest reason I can recommend this album to you is that just the variety of styles on it. That's something you almost always expect from Madlib. If you look at the Beat Conductor series, if you look at the Mad Lib Medicine shows, you know that this is a guy who, in the latter half of his career, has spent a lot of time kind of traveling the globe, going to these different places, finding great records, and then making mixes out of them. And that's really exciting. But normally, oh, this is the Mad Lib Brazil album. This is the Mad Lib Jazz album. This is the Mad Lib Rock album. This one, which is again being billed as kind of a solo album, is a little bit of everything in a really exciting way. So you have a track like Loose Goose, which is frankly kind of ridiculous. It's a pretty silly song, but it actually hits pretty hard. And I mean, Freddie Gibbs has already rapped over some of these and freestyled on these beats. And so, that's the sort of one that, sounds corny maybe, or sounds a little goofy, but, with the right rapper over it, it would slap pretty hard, frankly. And you have stuff like that that's way more traditionally hip hop, contrasted with a lot of kind of soul, more laid back, very chill soul, like Road to the Lonely Ones, which is one of the singles for this album. You have stuff like Dirt Knock that is way more, a little more avant-garde. There's more kind of fuzz, distortion, things mixed into the background for you to hear. And you also have songs like the eponymous track Sound Ancestors that has a lot of flute on it, and not that there's never been flute on Mad Lib songs before. You can find it in, his Sujinho album, for instance, and some of his Brazil related stuff. But finding all of these in conjunction with each other, I think speaks a little bit to maybe some of the Kieran Hepton influence, but also just gives you so much to work with and be excited about. I mean, it's the same thing with a track like Latino Negro that is almost like classical guitar. And so again, having something like that, contrasted against like Rhythm Chant, which is, way more percussive, you just have this really wide variety of styles. And of course, not everything is going to work for everybody. Not every single moment is going to be, super exciting. And frankly, some of these have the tendency to be so loopy in a way that if you've listened to stuff like Donuts by Jay Dilla, you might recognize, where sometimes you're only listening to like a minute and a half, 2 minutes of something. There are moments, I think The Call really early on could be one of them, where it's so looped that it's, only kind of the same progression, maybe 3 times every 30 seconds for a minute and a half. And not every one of those is going to connect with you, but that's okay, right? That's not necessarily what the album is intended for. It's not what it's trying to do. But all of that to say, I mean, this is a Salmon House Recommends for me. It's also the album I want to assign to you, Erlon Rotz, to give a listen to, because I'm just really interested in what you respond to here. I don't know how much you've really dug into Madlib, and even though I know you've probably listened to things that he's been involved in, I'd be really curious to see which ones you respond to here. I mean, for me, the track that he has for Jay Dilla on this album feels like an instant classic and something that people will be listening to for a long time. It feels like an instant part of the Madlib catalog. I've named a bunch of the ones that I really responded to, but there's ones like Chino that I feel like I listened to before I sat down to do this, and I was like, I didn't really notice this one before. So I'm excited by the possibility that you might respond to different ones than I did. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this album, because I think it's a pretty diverse collection of recordings. There's not necessarily a really clear overarching sort of goal to them. But again, I think in the career of somebody who has done a lot of different things and kind of focused on different projects to complete those tasks, it's really exciting in a way to hear just the wide variety of his ability. And I do think it lends something really unique to this album.
All right. And the last one I want to recommend is Tribulation, Where the Gloom Becomes Sound. So the Swedish gothic metal band has arrived with their latest album, and they're really leaning into their heavier metal horror structure that they've had going for a little while. Where the Gloom Becomes Sound continues to dive into that dark metal style, but it's now incorporating some classical elements along with some Swedish folk. In Remembrance starts off with Swedish vocals and dark growls and screams. When I compare this to their last release, Down Below, one of their best performing albums, This one is definitely taking a slightly darker and creepier and more serious tone, where I felt that Down Below, even though it's still a dark, metal album, I felt that it had some mildly more comical or silly moments to it where I wasn't taking it that seriously at times. This release, though, definitely feels like they've matured much more. The sound is really full and surrounding. The lyrics are catchy and filled with horror. They touch on various different subjects like folklore and death. They include more acoustic and classical instrumentation, as mentioned before. Some are starting with guitar or piano, and Leth from front to back is entirely dark piano. I really like this album. Each song slowly grows and kind of breathes on its own. The guitars, while heavy and dark, they're creating these really beautiful and catchy melodies and rhythms. The drums are kind of crashing in between these moments, and the vocals feel much more refined and well put together. I enjoyed Down Below when it released, but I don't think it struck me like this album did when I first listened to it. So if you're a fan of metal or just darker genres, or maybe even just Swedish folk, this is definitely a great gothic heavy metal album from a great band. So highly recommend this one. If you don't know who Tribulation is, you're missing out.
Next up, an album that I spent a long time watching and was actually delayed in terms of coming out a little bit, but I'm really excited it came out this year. This is Overstand, the album by Apifera. And this is a very interesting band and also album because one of the members is Rejoicer, who's a producer from Israel who is signed to Stone's Throw Records. This is also a Stone's Throw album, and of course, you can see where my loyalties lie and sort of what I'm interested in. But I will say that having Rejoicer on it is really what drew me to it because I like his production a lot. I think he's a really interesting guy. But this is a larger sort of live band experience. It's a quartet, so he's only one part of it. So I was sort of drawn in by something, someone that I knew, but it's really a much larger thing. And their music is very wide ranging. There's a lot of different sounds on this. It's a jazz album, but draws on a lot of music, I think, from the Middle East as well as maybe parts of Northern Africa, and really has a very open, organic, natural, emotional sound to it that is, for me, the central kind of driving aspect of it is really the synthesizer. And the synths and keyboards on this album, to me, are just really seductive and beautiful. And it's also well mixed in terms of the album track list, I think, because it starts with Overstand, which really sucks you in based on the power of that. It's the way I would classify this is almost like cosmic jazz, or as jazz music that is, very like organic, environmental, like of the earth, and then beyond to the stars. And that's a really exciting, interesting sound to have for the album. I think it's something that grabs you. And while it may be harder to kind of pick out the individual parts that work for you really well, I think there are clear standout tracks. I think of Yaki's Delight. I think of The Pit and the Beggar, which is about midway through the album, is when you start to see the sound space out a lot more and become more spacious and kind of almost Grizzly Bear-like in some ways, a little proggy, a little bit more drawn out. And then it kind of snaps back in by the end, and you have songs like Four Green Yellows leading into, Pulse 420, which again just really leaves you with very beautiful sort of astral synthesizers and just sort of takes you into another realm. I think that the sequencing of the album is well done. The middle I think there were more sketches in the middle. There's ones that, one for Iris that can kind of dribble off. But the central songs of it, the ones that begin and end, really capture your attention and have a way of, even with no lyrics on this, no vocals on this, are still very emotive, very spiritual, and really take you to another place. So this is probably, of the albums I've talked about during this section, this is probably the most idiosyncratic in some ways. I think, space jazz is not going to be everybody's bag, but at the same time, I mean, it has a very listenable quality to it, I think, because of how soothing and natural it is. I mean, apifera is the name of a flower. It's a type of orchid. And so with that in mind, it sort of has this sort of floral, blossoming, beautiful quality to it that you can do a really deep listen to. I could see myself listening to this like on a hike or, laying on a hill somewhere. But I can also tell you, if you're playing a game or doing your homework or folding clothes, it's also just very kind of thoughtful, sensual, thought-provoking music that will sort of take you to another place if you let it. And so for that reason, it seems like I just had a lot of love to give. It's almost Valentine's Day, so maybe that's where that's coming from. But I would also say that Salmon House recommends this album. I think that all three of the albums I talked about this week are recommends for me and are worth your time. And even though I would say January was a bit of a dry month, there were, sort of these selected releases that I actually think were quite strong and sort of kept the flame alive for this very cold month.
I do have a few honorable mentions that I want to bring up. I did listen to the Mermaid in China Wild and Pretty Games album, and that was a nice listen, but I don't think it really compared to some of these albums that I've already mentioned. The same goes for the FNK3 album, Sound of Man. Very interesting, very weird album, but I felt that it was missing a lot, so I definitely didn't want to say that I'd recommend it. But if you're into the avant-garde or the very strange sampled music, that's another one that you might want to listen to. Another album that I was anticipating was the latest album from the band The Body. I've seen All I Need to See. And this one's a very interesting one because I've had a strange relationship with the doom sludge metal band. I initially found them from their track Can't Carry No Weight on their 2018 record. I have fought against it, but can't any longer. I loved the track. I thought it was intriguing and really wild. The screams that were going on in the background was really dark and pretty spooky. And I was really excited to dive into the rest of the discography. And then I found that scream is present basically on every single track and doesn't really change at all. And it's there mostly from the beginning of the track to the end of the track. So I got pretty sick of it, just diving into one album. So I was really hoping that this latest album would kind of stir a little bit away from that, not dive too much into that same sound. And their single, A Lament, kind of gave me hope, but also a lot of worry because there is that scream again, but it's much more distorted. It's very different, and it's still there on the album. Definitely a little bit better. It's their better album so far, but there's still that feeling where it's like, okay, I've heard this sound over and over again. I don't know if I really want to hear it again. So I'd recommend it if you like doom, sludge, or noise. So another good honorable mention. And now it's that time where I get to assign an album to you, Sam and Drew. And I think I've got perfect opportunity to give you something that you hate, but I think I'm still gonna give you one that I think you'll enjoy, but maybe not as much as some of the ones that I've assigned to you before. This Dante Elefante album, Mid-Century Modern Romance. I believe this is an artist that you haven't heard of before, and I think you'd really kind of enjoy this based off of the Avalanches recommendation and just how much you did enjoy that album. So I think you'll like this one. It's definitely a little bit different, but I think it's one that you'll come back to and give a positive review on. So I'm excited to see what you recommend to me.
With that, we have come to the end of our albums for this month of January 2021. Of course, we're excited for everything that's coming out in February and beyond. So if you have checked out something that you really like, that you think we need to listen to or hear, please drop it in the comments and let us know. We're always adjusting and changing our track list, talking to each other about what exactly it is we're going to review or finding exciting. So please join in on that conversation. Come on, come over here. Let's talk. What are you listening to? What's in your earbuds? Do you use the big headphones like that instead? Let us know. Let us know what your listening pleasure is so that we can get a piece of that too, just like we share with you every single month.
We're going to be keeping these a little bit shorter just to make it a little easier to digest, just so you can pop in, know what's good, go back and put it on your Spotify or Apple Music. If you enjoy these, subscribe, stick around because we'll be doing this every month along with plenty of other things in between. And check out last month's and the month before that because we've been doing these for a little while and there are a ton of albums that you don't want to miss.
With that, we will say au revoir and catch a wave. For Erlon Rotz, I'm Sam and Drew. This is Sam and House. The door is open. Walk right on in.